This from Kai on X. Following on from your discussion on Harry Kane last week, does Bayern's 4-0 win against Frankfurt prove that actually they're as good a team without him?
Well, I think it shows that there's no need to have this massive existential panic every time he's got a small injury, which has really characterised his time in Germany so far. Because there's still this, as we've said before, this Bundesliga guilt about having spent over 100 million euros on a player, of course, the most expensive Bundesliga player of all time. Not only that, but he was approaching 30, with only a year left on his contract. And so there's a sense, not just should Bayern have spent that, but it's so unusual for a deal of that size to be made by a German club that it affects the way that Kane is looked at still. Now, he has been impeccable on and off the field since he's arrived, but there's still that sense of, have we put too many of our eggs in one basket like the other clubs do? Because German football operates very differently, and even Bayern operate very differently to the way that other major European leagues and major European clubs do. So, as I think I've said to you before, Don, I had a couple of people who's, know German football backwards and whose opinions I really respect, say after Kane's performance at the Euros last summer, oh, maybe he's done now, or maybe he's nearly done. Now, I don't think there's any evidence to really suggest that. He's been through these periods before where he's struggled with injury and he's tried to play through them, and there we have it. But there's just this sense of, God, we still spent that much on a player. So no matter what he can do, have we invested too much in this one chip? And for that, I think the fact that they were able to, as Kai says, play without him. He came on as sub in the second half because he had a thigh injury, he wasn't quite fit, and play well and get themselves into a strong winning position. Okay, it went from 2-0 to 4-0 when he came on, but the fact that he was able to sit out and Bayern looked just as fluent, looked just as dangerous. And of course, we know that Kompany doesn't necessarily need to play with like a proper, in inverted commas, centre forward as well. He's got so many brilliant attacking options there. I think it felt like quite a pivotal moment, especially because the week approaching the game, when it became clear that Kane wasn't going to be start to fit the game against Eintracht Frankfurt, there was definitely an intake of breath, and sharp intake of breath, and we let Matthias Tell go as well. The one guy on the roster who could directly replace him. Of course, a different type of player, but was largely understudied Kane before he went to Tottenham. So I think it doesn't prove anything long term, but in the short term, what it does to the feeling around Bayern and around Kane, I think, is very significant.
So, crisis, what existential crisis, David? However, Bayern are maybe more effective with Kane?
I think so. Look, with the player of Kane's quality, you always want him in the team. But I'll reiterate what I said last time out, and that is, look, if that release clause does exist, he can go back to the Premier League. If that does exist and Bayern can recoup a lot of that money, then I think they give it serious thought, because they don't want to be living with this existential dread.
No one wants to live with existential dread.
No, they don't. They don't.
Not even Jean-Paul Sartre.
I understand. I understand how they feel. I think about it sometimes when
I'm glad we're finally addressing this after several years of OTC.
No, I get it. I have the same feeling. I buy lots of coats and jackets, and I spend a lot of money on them. And sometimes I look at them all on the
summer.
Yeah, exactly. And I sometimes look at them on all the hooks, and I'm kind of like, oh, why have I got 6 jackets and I paid that money for them? Why am I doing that? So I get what they're saying, but nobody's coming in to buy my coats and jackets to say, it's too late, I bought them. But Bayern can,
But to me, what that says is, if you receive an acceptable offer for one of those jackets, you might take the decision to part ways.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk after the show.
Yeah.
Listen, but before we get to that, this question from Alfred on Blue Sky. I saw earlier this week that Marseille president Pablo Longoria was given a 15-match suspension after he claimed his side were the victims of corruption. Well, the question is, what exactly is going on here? And let me just clarify what he said. This is corruption. This is Longoria speaking. This is corruption. I've never seen anything like it. You can write it down. Pablo Longoria says it's corruption. Everything has been organised. It's planned. It's rigged. It's let's just say, in translation, rude
Shitty?
word. Yeah, possibly. I've just got the 4 stars between the S and the Y. So let's go for that, unless he said it in French. It's a shitty championship. If Olympique Marseille had a proposal for the Super League, we'll leave straight away.
Well, apart from the factual issues with that about the Super League not existing yet, and it claiming that it doesn't want to replace domestic championships. Look, this is what he said directly after the game against Auxerre last weekend, where they lost 3-0. They felt they should have had a penalty. They felt Derek Cornelius shouldn't have been sent off. I mean, honestly, the decisions that went against them weren't massively controversial, but we talked in main OTC yesterday, didn't we, about how Fenerbahce and Mourinho are feeding each other's paranoia. And I think the atmosphere around Marseille at the moment and all season has been to just really go back and complain about refereeing the whole time. They've got a lot to be happy about this season. You know, they've got a great coach who they wouldn't have thought they'd have got in, say, June, in Roberto De Zerbi, but they ended up getting him. He's had a massive influence. They've been really good. They've been the best team in the division apart from PSG. The recruitment has largely worked. Okay, there've been a few little missteps, but on the whole, you look at the players who've come in. Rabiot, Greenwood, they've done really, really well. And yet here they are just tying themselves in knots about refereeing decisions that in this case were actually correct. Now, afterwards, what happened with Longoria is he came out this was on the Saturday. He came out on the Monday and said, yeah, I have to stress the French league and French refereeing is not corrupt. And it came out with the immortal line, the word corruption means something slightly different in Spain. Because he's Spanish, of course. It doesn't. It really doesn't. And he goes, I'd like to make it clear that I know that no money is changing hands under the table. And the thing is, but because as you brought us with the quote, Dotun, there is no possible way of backing out of that.
In fact, he underlines it a few times.
He's not given himself any sort of wiggle room.
It's rigged. It's organised.
But it's not just to do with decisions on the pitch. They were unhappy that Mehdi Benatia, the sporting director, the recently formalised as sporting director, was banned for some words that he had with a fourth official. That fourth official who ended up refereeing this game. So that's what I mean about they're winding themselves up really about a situation that has nothing to do with the actual events that are going on before us. And L'Équipe was forced to come out yesterday and say, look, we're all behind the referees. There needs to be more respect for referees, because Roberto De Zerbi followed this up by saying, when I leave Marseille, I'm never managing in France again because the refereeing's a joke. And it's just, I don't really understand how this helps. I mean, really, this is the sort of stuff that makes
French
headlines.
Football, doesn't it?
It does. And you know what? It automatically will make refereeing and officiating worse, because you're putting people under unbearable pressure that they should never have to suffer. And, referees have talked about, the toll that it's had not just on them, but on their families, absolutely unreasonable stuff. And I tend to think, and I've tended to think over most of the time that I've watched football, that over very many years, that when teams go after, winning teams never go after a ref, do they? Really?
No.
It's very, very rare. And if you're looking at improving refereeing, that only happens through dialogue. It doesn't happen through stuff like this.
I think managers and players sometimes feel that there isn't a dialogue and it isn't possible to create one. And I think there's a view sometimes that referees, officials, refereeing bodies are perhaps untouchable and almost speak down, and you aren't allowed that dialogue. But I mean, the Zerbi's comment, I'd just love to know where he thinks he's going to go, where the refereeing is suitable. Who is happy with their league's refereeing? Like, there's a lot of like, oh, so-and-so is happy with VAR, and I'm just like, I don't think they are.
Well, but people normally in continental leagues say, why can't we be more like England or Germany?
I mean, wow!
It's
It's incredible to me.
Yeah.
I was going to say we already talked yesterday on OTC about refereeing in Turkey. So De Zerbi isn't going to Turkey anytime soon. So he doesn't like France as well. England's got its issues as well, like constantly flaring up. Arne Slot's just been given a touchline ban as well.
You're not 15 match
things.
though. 15 match.
I think
suggests that this is much more serious than anything.
Well, it is. He suggested the whole game was. We didn't just suggest. He said the whole game was corrupt.
15 feels extreme, though.
But I don't know really. What else can they? What else can they do?
But what do you think is going on then? If it's extreme, why do you think they've given him a 15-match ban?
Because they don't want people using the word corruption. I don't know. Corruption opens up a lot of doors to certain things. That's what they've seen.
Not
The thing is, it
issues.
creates. I think, there is that, but I think it just does create an intolerable atmosphere for referees, and I think that's the major thing. And as you say, undermines the whole of French football by doing that. But if we are talking about starting a dialogue, I think like I said, I think the clubs and the people who run the clubs have, and players and coaches have a huge responsibility here. But if there is responsibility on the other side, I would say that a lot of rule changes in recent years, and I guess like VAR is part of that as well, have tried to make it so there's almost no need for discussion, or everything's open and shut, like there's a solution for everything, when actually there can't possibly be a solution for everything. There will always be opinion, there will always be interpretation, there will always be human error, no matter how many little changes that you introduce to the offside rule or the handball rule, or that you promise that there's this technology that's going to weed out every error. It cannot happen.
But if you're taking part in a spectacle,
and that's the problem.
If you're taking part in a spectacle as a football match is, should there not be the protocol at least that you accept that this is a spectacle? It might be imperfect, but let's keep our, if you like, opinions about the officiating behind closed doors, because to a certain extent journalists are responsible, because they go straight after a match and say to the coach, what do you think about that decision? Well, what's the coach supposed to say if it goes against them?
Yeah, but this is the problem what you'll have. Journalists will ask that question because they're looking for a particular answer. If the manager gives a particular answer that they disagree with or they feel is a little bit extreme, that they're not happy with, they will then bury that manager. And that's the problem what you have. It's a vicious cycle. There's so many elements involved here with it. And I don't know. I think I'm of the opinion that there should be a bit more of an open dialogue. I'm not liking kind of what you've just said in terms of things behind closed doors. Yeah, I want people to be open with what they say. But like I say, I think the word corruption has really thrown fuel on the fire here.
If you want it to be open, then you have to accept there will be 15 match suspensions, because if it's open, words are going to be said that are just not acceptable. I would have thought. Anyway, Ben on Instagram says, while much of the talk about the Bundesliga this season has been about the title race, I can't help but feel the unbelievably good season from Freiburg has gone under the radar. How exactly has manager Julian Schuster turned them into Champions League contenders?
Well, I guess the point about Freiburg is that they've been under the radar for a while, really. This is a club that has built itself from a yo-yo club between the Bundesliga and Bundesliga 2 into a team that consistently finishes in the top half and consistently challenges for the European places and often gets itself into Europe. Now, I think Schuster's job is brilliant, because when you bear in mind that he has no first-team head coach experience before, that he's still in his 30s, that he's taken over from a club legend in Christian Streich, who was the longest-serving coach in the Bundesliga by a long way. He'd been there forever, and we talked about Atalanta and Gasperini. It was even harder to imagine Freiburg without Streich. And I think there was a feeling that they might start to fall away here. But Schuster has done really, really well. A sort of ambitious game plan that really, I think, acknowledges their limitations as well. So they don't try to dominate possession, but they don't try to play on the counter-attack either. So their game really is about defending from the front and trying to disrupt the opposition so they don't create that many chances. Particularly in recent weeks, that has really, really clicked. I think the other thing that they've done really well, and because if you've got their sort of budget, you're not going to have the sort of striker that scores 25 goals a season. Schuster particularly has managed to get the best players in the team, who are Vincenzo Grifo and Rizzo Dayan, into positions where they can score goals more. So they start in wide positions and then they move into central positions more easily. And I think that's borne out by the fact that, you know, they're the two top scorers in the team, as well as being the best players in the team so far. So I think Schuster has done a great job bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that a lot of people were expecting Freiburg to drop off quite badly this season. But in terms of him making them into Champions League contenders, well, they've been Champions League contenders in a couple of previous seasons. Certainly at this point of the season, in February, March, they've never managed to see it over the line. Now, if Schuster can do that, if he can get them into the top four, that will be an incredible achievement, and that will be worthy of another discussion going later into the season. And you could argue that if there is a season that he's going to do it, maybe this is it. Because Bayern and Leverkusen are way better than everyone else, despite the fact there's a gap between them. The two of them are way better than everyone else. That is simply not a discussion. Leipzig, very inconsistent this season. Dortmund, way down there. Eintracht Frankfurt, who started the season brilliantly and still in top four, of course, they lost Omar Mamouche in the winter window. So if there is a season that you're going to seize this opportunity, this surely is it.
I think it's I was just wanting to say, I think it's very a basic thing, but it's very important to get your home form right. And there's only Bayern and Leverkusen who have won more points at home this season. So if you set your stall out to say, right, first and foremost, we're going to make our home ground absolute fortress. We'll be imperious here. And I think everything can build from there when you do that.
What I love about this question, and thank you for posing it, Ben, is that it gives us an opportunity to consider teams that may have gone under the radar, even within our own discussions here at OTC. Not many teams get under the radar, but if you can spot one and drop us a question, it would be absolutely amazing. Yeah, always look forward to the opportunity to do that. Oh, and by the way, we've got a Luka Modrić question in a moment or two, and we all love a Luka Modrić question, don't we?
So much.
Oh, yes, I can't wait for that. But first, Alex on email, if Heidenheim end up going down, which is looking pretty likely now, do you think Frank Schmidt will continue his incredible journey with them, or will he move on and try to build something similar with a new club? And if he does move on, which club, this is a bit I love, would most benefit from someone like him?
Well, they're not down yet, Heidenheim. I would say that for a start. Drew at Leipzig last weekend, which put an end to a really quite damaging run of defeats. Now, bear in mind that what they've done over recent seasons is extraordinary, but that has really accelerated in the last couple of seasons. So Frank Schmidt, we talked about Christian Streich being long-serving. Frank Schmidt has been in charge of Heidenheim since 2007, which is remarkable. He was a young man when he took over. He's no longer a young man, says narrator.
It'd be interesting to see where he's at in the top 5 leagues in terms of length of tenure at clubs.
Yeah, I mean, there can't be anyone. There can't be anyone, I don't think. And I think everything has to be judged in that context. So, of course, they qualified for Europa Conference League last season, having come up into the top flight for the first time, which as champions, which was remarkable. These are all remarkable achievements. And they were pretty good in the Conference League as well. You know, there's some really notable results. In the playoff, they won away at Copenhagen, which is their only win, I think, since the start of this calendar year, when they beat Union Berlin, who were absolutely dreadful at the time. And They lost the second leg at home in Heidenheim, so they haven't gotten through to the last 16. I thought they were unfortunate. They played pretty well in that, and they conceded the third goal, which knocked them out, really chasing the game, trying to seal their win, trying to seal their passage through in extra time before they got to the penalties. And I think as well, you have to look at the fact that because they are such shooting stars, it was always going to be an impossible season for them to cope with stabilising in the Bundesliga for only their second season and a European campaign, in some cases against quite good opposition. Of course, they came up against Chelsea, of course, in one of their group games, and the fact that they lost their three best players at the start of this season. Kleindienst, Bester and Aaron Dinkji all went, and they are absolutely irreplaceable when you have the budget of Heidenheim. And, we've seen since then, okay, Bester hasn't got into the team at Benfica, but Kleindienst has become one of the best strikers in the Bundesliga and has gone on to get in the Germany team at 29 and score goals for Germany. So I do have some sympathy here. If they get in the playoff, I still think they've got a chance of staying up, because traditionally the team that finishes in the relegation playoff position from the Bundesliga, rather than the team that's trying to get promoted from the Bundesliga side, tends to win. That might be an exception to this rule, but they're still well in it, even if there is a bit of a gap between them and fourth bottom. I think he would stay. I think we've talked about it with Streich, and we talked about it with Gasperini yesterday. He belongs there. And, I don't think, and no one's forcing him out, that's for sure, just because they've had a season where they found it more difficult. And it was never a question of would they find this season more difficult. It was when they would find this season more difficult, when the bottom would drop out of it, when you look at the situation that he's been faced with and that they're just really structurally not ready for. But if I could see him going somewhere else, Alex, I think a Borussia Mönchengladbach. It's a club like that, a club that is an appreciably bigger club than Heidenheim, that has hit a bit of a trough, and he would have better resources, better facilities, potential of getting quite a lot higher. And the way that he's able to build teams and play quite ambitiously, even with limited resources, makes me think that he could do a great job at a club like that.
Okay, this is our obligatory Luka Modrić question from Tyler on YouTube. With Luka Modrić reminding everybody of how good he is with a wonder strike last weekend, how much longer do you think we can expect him to keep going at the top level? Carlo Ancelotti has stated that Luka Modrić is free to play at Real Madrid for as long as he wishes. Well, that may not come to fruition, but nevertheless, he is remarkable. A force of nature, is he not, David?
Yeah, just unbelievable. I think he'll just keep... he'll keep having a rolling contract put on his table. He'll keep signing it every year until he feels he can still give something. And he's in a great position now where he's got a lot of excellent young players around him who can play and carry the burden now of leading the team. And he can dip in as and when, if there's a nice game at the Bernabeu, he can just come in, play 15, 20 games a season. His fitness levels are still really, really good, but his mind is, above all, really, really good. So, yeah, I think he could be around for, he's 39 now. 41, 42? No, whoa, what's so funny about that?
Once upon a time, I think it was only Stanley Matthews that did that.
He's kind of in the ideal position, really, isn't he? Because not only, as you say, has he kept himself in unbelievable condition, but they're not forced to overplay him as well, because they do have quite a big squad. But having said that, the other thing, David, is they're very grateful for him this season with the injuries that they've had in midfield.
Yeah, exactly. And look, the injuries that they've had, have gone that way. And I just think it's important as a club to have a continuation process. And for when somebody does leave or somebody is in decline, and Real Madrid are always really, really good at identifying that and picking up somebody who can be the heir. And they've got several heirs around there at the moment, so he can play a really nice role for the next few years for them.
So with them being forced to use him this season, of course it's not forced. He's as Ancelotti says, a pleasure to see him play all the time, and the fact they've been using Dani Ceballos maybe a bit more than they would have intended to this season as well. They have to go out and buy a midfielder this summer.
I think they might. And Danny Ceballos just picked up an injury as well. So Modrić might be required a little bit more between now and the end of the season, more than presumed. So, yeah, I could definitely see them buying a midfielder if they are the right price in the summer. Or do they just get Trent Alexander-Arnold and use him as a midfielder?
Yeah, well, let's leave that for an Ask
Drop that little hand grenade in and walk away.
Can we leave that for an Ask OTC question from you? It is now time, though, for our Game of the Week, brought to you by FotMob. Each week, our experts recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend. And just as importantly, they also suggest what we can eat with it. That's my favourite part, obviously. David, what are you going for this week as your Game of the Week?
Oh, there's only one place I could go. And if you listened to On the Continent, you would know why. And that is Napoli versus Inter. Serie A title decider. Or is it? Because Atlanta might want to have
what you did there.
Yeah. Atlanta might want to have a little say in it. So
and Juve, will they have a little say in it?
It could be. There is a scenario where they could also come back and do it. Yes, come on. We need it. Come on, all the other title races around Europe are dead pretty much. So we need to juice this one up. 5 o'clock on Saturday. I mean, it speaks for itself really. So we'll see how this one goes. I think it's gonna be a really good game. I think a bit of a chess match. Very cagey, so don't expect a lot of goals in this one. I think it's going to be very, very cagey, but it's going to be interesting nonetheless. And given there's some Milan involvement, we're going to go for a chicken Milanese.
Whoa, I like that.
Yeah, that's so good, man.
Yeah, I do like that. Yeah, I like the thought of that. FotMob, for your information, state that the current head-to-head record for these two teams are Napoli 12 wins, Inter 12 wins. And guess what? Guess how many draws between them?
Is there 12 by chance?
That's going to be hard to call. That is going to be so... And fascinating as well. Napoli, by the way, have the second best home record, whereas Inter have the third best away record in Serie A this season. So...
Something's got to give.
Something's got to give.
Has to give.
Home or away. I'm just tucking into my chicken Milanese.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for that. Andy, hard act to follow.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you time to get that food down. It's going to be an all-Italian weekend, though. I've gone for Roma versus Como, which I think is really, really interesting. You had Claudio Ranieri talking earlier this week about how he thinks Cesc Fabregas is going to be one of the best coaches in Europe in the next 3 or 4 years. I mean, obviously, there's part of me that says, you wily old fox, you're just trying to patronise him a little bit before you get them at the weekend. Because although Como did beat Napoli last weekend and play well in doing so, Roma have been formidable at home since Ranieri's taken over. They've got the third best home record in Serie A. They absolutely thwacked Monza, well, of course, because it was Monza, 4-0 on Monday as well. And they were able to give a rest to a lot of players. Now, of course, Dovbik's carrying a slight injury at the moment, but Shomorodov came in and scored. There are a few other little rotations as well. So you get the impression that Ranieri is so on top of everything. He's keeping the squad nice and fresh, which is going to be important. They've got the games against Athletic coming up in the Europa League, which are a huge challenge as well. But I don't think it's to be ruled out that they actually qualify for Europe through Serie A. It may be even possible with the amount of games you've got, a dozen games left or whatever. So I think that's possible. But Como, not to be overlooked.
Just a question. If Ranieri apparently has a lot of say in who his successor at Rome is going to be, you know where I'm going with this, don't you?
Good question.
Cesc Fabregas?
If Como didn't have so much money, I would be into that as an idea.
But it's Rome.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it would be very, very exciting. But I think like part of what Como are doing at the moment says we're building for the long term, and you're our coaching prince. You know, the fact they got Kakare and Diao, two players who you wouldn't expect them to be able to get maybe at the start of the season. You know the money's there, but you've got to convince the players to come. They're looking at redeveloping the stadium. There's definitely a plan going forward. Anyway, obviously, when in Rome,
eat as the Romans do.
Suppli are better than Arancini. Everyone knows that by now. So we're having them as the starter. Also, I've got very into making carbonara recently.
Yeah.
So I think spaghetti alla carbonara, nice sort of traditional Roman dish, and to make it especially Roman for you, obviously not for me because I'm almost vegan, a bit of extra pecorino in for you. How about that?
Very kind of you. I was going to go for the calzone otherwise if you didn't stick some meat in. You can follow these matches, by the way, and many more from across Europe and beyond with FotMob. FotMob is the best place to check the latest scores and in-depth stats from all the football on the continent. You can download the free FotMob app right now and get all the latest analysis at your fingertips in time for the weekend. And thank you for listening to Ask OTC. If you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotun, at Andy Brassel, at David Jacker, or at OTC Pod. And you can always email us, otc@footballramble.com.